We all have a lot of data, and it has to positively, absolutely stay safe. It can't get into the wrong hands, and the biggest challenge we have is how to transfer it from here to there. We all know as leaders that legacy tools that transfer our important files and sensitive data are mostly outdated and fall short on security, especially with the demands of today's remote workforce. Relying on outdated technology puts our organization's brand at risk, and that is unacceptable. So we're excited to invite you to step into the future of completely secured managed file transfer from our friends at Kiteworks. Kiteworks is absolutely, positively the most secure managed file platform on the market today. They've been FedRAMP moderate authorized by the Department of Defense since 2017. And unlike traditional legacy systems with limited functionality, Kiteworks has unmatched software security with ongoing bounty programs and regular pen testing to minimize vulnerabilities. And the coolest part, they have easy to use one-click appliance updates you will love. Step into the future of secure managed file transfer with Kiteworks. Visit kiteworks.com to get started. That's kiteworks.com to get started today. And now, the show. Hey everyone, thanks for joining. This is the second episode in the privacy series. This one also has us joined by legendary Mary Marwig, the privacy advocate and privacy consultant at DataGrail. And as we explained, and as you heard in the last episode, if you haven't checked that one out first, but they help organizations like Salesforce, Amazon, Instacart develop and maintain privacy, manage their privacy programs, and they have a unique model for doing so. Check them out. We'll have a link in the show notes as well. But in this discussion, we'll discuss a whole bunch of topics related to privacy and cybersecurity. We discuss shadow IT, common challenges, innovative approaches to data privacy that organizations can do, individual privacy rights, why it matters to each one of us, as well as best practices for managing data privacy. This is the story of Mary Marwig and innovative approaches to data privacy. Come join us as we dive deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today, interviewing top technology leaders from around the world and sharing true cybercrime stories to raise awareness. From the creators of Vigilance, the newest global technology newsletter, translating cyber news into business language we all understand. So please help us keep this going by subscribing for free to our YouTube channel and downloading our podcast episodes on Apple and Spotify so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and now the show.
Is if you want to reduce your digital footprint, you can either go company by company, which is very laborious, and that only covers the companies you know about, to delete your data or to restrict the selling or sharing of your data.
Right.
Or you can employ an authorized agent service that will do that for you. Not all of them are very comprehensive. There are gaps right now, but there is a new law in California that's trying to resolve that. It just got passed last year, called the California Delete Act. Basically, data brokers, so any company that sells or shares information about a consumer with whom they don't have a direct relationship, has to register with the state. And then in the next couple years, they have to figure out a way to do deletion requests if the person, goes to the state and says, hey, I want all the data brokers in the state of California to delete all of the information they have on me. The data broker.
That's a big ask on companies, isn't it?
Huge ask.
That's a huge ask because it's a really big manual task to go and find that user, find their data, and then delete it.
Well, and that's what we do at DataGrail. So we help companies do that. What data are you processing first and foremost? Because as you said, it's a mess. There's a lot of applications out there that process this. So we typically find that in an organization with like 500 to 1,000 employees, they'll have 1,500 different applications, but IT may only be aware of like 200.
Right, because of shadow IT, right? Because of all these, there's Internet of Things devices, people get grants or money, or they invest themselves and they tie in different apps, and everybody's got an AI app that they want to try out, and all these things get tied into the network.
Download an extension that nobody
Mm-hmm.
realized was sucking up data. It's a lot. So that's why it cracks me up when I hear about companies trying to do this manually. I'm like, how?
Right.
How are you doing this manually? The scale is just too big. So we help companies understand what they're processing first and foremost. We also help them understand the risk of specific data holding, like the risk themselves as a company and the risks to their consumers. And then we also do things like processing these consumer requests. So, if I'm a customer of a makeup company and I want to know what data they collect on me, I don't have a right in Illinois. But if I was from California or the other states that have these laws, I would have a right to that. And so what do you give them? You have to find that data in the systems, pull it back, put it together, send it out, and it all has to be accounted for and tracked because this is regulated. It's not just a nice to have. You're just like, well, we're doing the right thing. Sure.
Well, it can't just be emailed as an attachment because that could be compromised too, right? You would have to have like a secure encrypted, encrypted on one end, encrypted on the other, and then sent. Like there's a whole mess of things you have to think about.
Well, so you just actually touched on something that I've talked about. This doesn't really get talked a lot about, but like weaponizing access requests. So pretending to be someone else in order to get commercial data about someone. So
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, especially we just saw that large, massive, the mother of all data leaks with 26 billion credentials. So it's just becoming easier and easier to impersonate somebody or to be impersonated online. And so from that point, then they could make data requests and get more of your data.
Absolutely. So that is a threat vector as well, especially if you're doing like social engineering, right?
Right.
So you find you're doing like a whaling attack. You find someone you want to like try to get into their system, then you go impersonate them. You get a bunch of commercial data about them. You pretend to be the company they do the most business with, send a few crappy phishing links because it's contextual and appropriate and like they would recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
What have you given up? So that's why you need to verify these requests as well. So you need to we have a product called Smart Verification at DataGrill, which basically provides contextual information. So it's not something you can just easily Google or find out about someone, but something they would only know. It's kind of like something something you are, the types of authentication methods. But it's something to keep in mind when you're operationalizing this, because it's a hard problem. So there's really no way to do it manually. I just laugh when people tell me that. I'm like, oh, how? That's privacy theater.
Let me that's unbelievable. So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Why is it that you think that in the U.S. we struggle so much with our data compared to other countries like the EU? Like why were they the first ones to have GDPR and we don't have anything like that? Why is that, do you think?
Well, it really goes back to World War II and the horrors of the Holocaust. That's kind of where the modern concepts of privacy started. In Germany afterward, there were obviously, as you know,
that's a really good point. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
They were able to track down who had what religious beliefs, who had what medical conditions, etc.
It's horrifying, but that's where this concept really began of how you can weaponize data against people about things that are who they are, their religion, their ethnicity, their race, their family members, their citizenship, basic stuff that, you can't. It's highly sensitive information, but the data privacy.
Meanwhile, in America, we're curating our lives on TikTok voluntarily, right?
Oh my gosh! Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's part of it too. So, like, we're
taking videos with our school and our house in the background, and our cars, and like driving around in cars with like the images of how many people are in the car and in the family and stuff, and you're just giving it all away for free.
Oh, I know those little stick figures on people's minivans. I'm like, do that,
My
you're
family
hurting.
cringes whenever they see that. And they're like, why would we not do that? I'm like, trust me, there's
Yeah.
1,000 reasons why you would not do.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
You know, we all have a lot of data, and it has to positively, absolutely stay safe. It can't get into the wrong hands. And the biggest challenge we have is how to transfer it from here to there. We all know as leaders that legacy tools that transfer our important files and sensitive data are mostly outdated and fall short on security, especially with the demands of today's remote workforce. Relying on outdated technology puts our organization's brand at risk, and that is unacceptable. So we are excited to invite you to step into the future of completely secured managed file transfer from our friends at Kiteworks. Kiteworks is absolutely, positively the most secure managed file platform on the market today. They've been FedRAMP moderate authorized by the Department of Defense since 2017. And unlike traditional legacy systems with limited functionality, Kiteworks has unmatched software security with ongoing bounty programs and regular pen testing to minimize vulnerabilities. And the coolest part, they have easy to use one-click appliance updates you will love. Step into the future of secure managed file transfer with Kiteworks. Visit kiteworks.com to get started. That's kiteworks.com to get started today. And now the show.
Or the bumper stickers of like, my students.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a proud, my kid is a proud student of whatever, right? And then their kid is taken. No. And you're like, what happened? I have no idea how that happened. Like, well, it's not that complicated.
I would say really just like the cultural experiences and the historical context of privacy in our two distinct histories is why you see more of a focus in Europe. Even I used to live in Germany. It was a fascinating time. I lived in geographically what used to be East Berlin. So it wasn't just, it was, the people I met there, they weren't just dealing with, only the aftermath of World War II, but what happened in, communist Germany after that. And there's an incredible film. If anyone who's watching the podcast likes film, I highly recommend this movie called The Lives of Others. It was from like 2005, 2004, 2005. Wonderful film explaining the surveillance state and how that can really, affect people in their lives and their job opportunities and things like that. In the United States, I feel like we're so individualistic. We don't realize that we're actually part of a capitalistic surveillance society now. Mm-hmm. Everything we do, we're generating bits and bops of data. And I think people have been, it's easy to see the use cases, but harder to see the abuse cases of that. One thing I always try to tell my friends who are like, oh, Mary, who cares? I have nothing to hide or whatever, is that data can be used to do lots of things. Like, for example, contextual pricing. Right. Maybe you're a rich person and like, you're like, I have nothing to care. Like, I have nothing to hide, nothing to worry about. I could just pay my way out of this thing. Like, oh, okay. Well, do you want the data about you to be used to charge you a much, much higher price than your neighbor who doesn't have this kind of data available?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, a t-shirt for your neighbor might cost $50, but for you, because of contextual information about your zip code, your income, which they can get from data brokers and like, what subset in a data set you are, like, man with dog in this zip code, who works in this industry, now that t-shirt's $150 for you.
Right.
Is that fair? But things like that, I think people just don't realize how much is going on in the background because we don't see it. Much like the personalized.
Well, at the end of the day, they're going to be like, I can afford the $150 t-shirt. I don't really care anyway. Right. Yeah. But it's much bigger than that is the point. Right. Because and as you get older and you go through more life experiences, there are going to be things you do not want out there. Right. It's just part of life or something about family members that you don't want out there, right? It's just private and sacred.
Yeah.
And so
here's a good example. Like if you're trying to get life insurance, right? If you have an app, let's say you download an app and it's like tracking your weight loss journey or whatever you're doing, and you fail spectacularly like everyone else who doesn't get on the program or whatever.
Right.
And this app, which was free, how they made money was by selling your data. So they have your name and how much you weigh and how you didn't do very well on your diet plan. Well, if a life insurance company buys that data and they can say,
It
like,
can
oh,
be used to decline coverage. It could be used to charge you
yes,
higher rates, all of it.
yes, yes. And this is a problem with period tracking apps. So menstruation apps, there are a lot of menstruation apps where you can, track your cycle. And people would be like, well, why would a retailer be interested in that? Well, it's not just retailers. Well, as we talked about earlier, women who are pregnant, as I've explained, are in a
Right.
position to change brands. It's a
Change
very
brands.
transitional
Well,
time.
just the fact that you know that, right? The fact that now we know that women that are pregnant change brands. I guarantee you back in the 60s, people didn't know that.
Yeah, right.
Right? Like
Right.
even big advertisers they weren't even aware of that phenomenon.
Right.
But because we're able to track the data and look at trends, we're able to see things like that.
Right. Well, and then who else would be interested in that data? So I've read articles where employers will buy that data and use it to determine your absentee rate. So if like in your menstruation app, you say like, "Ugh, I had a rough day. I had to call off work because I didn't feel well." Now you're pegged as someone who may be absentee, and so they won't extend that job offer to you. Right? All because of a period tracking app you just didn't want to put in your calendar, but you didn't realize the implications.
But because that data got sold by somebody that sold it to your employer, now all of a sudden you have that mark against you.
So getting back to your Matthew McConaughey ad from Salesforce that I haven't seen.
Data is the new gold, apparently.
Right. But they are now advertising on that. Like we're a privacy forward company, right? Because we're at a point now where consumers are getting more and more aware of this and they're rejecting it. And so smart companies are really leaning into privacy and saying, these are things that we will do and things that we won't do. And the things that we are going to do, we're going to be transparent about it and you're going to know about it. So there's going to be no surprises, So don't come at me and say like, we had no idea you were selling or sharing my data for this end, or maybe we just won't do that. We won't use that as a revenue stream for us. So we're starting to see more and more companies figure out that privacy is actually a business differentiator. Like look at Apple. If you had to choose between an Apple phone and a not Apple phone and privacy was a factor for you, which one would you choose? You'd probably choose the one that's being marketed more as the privacy forward company, right? So there are benefits to investing in this and really meeting your customers' expectations that they already have.
Right. And no technology is perfect because even Apple has the new, I believe it's the new journal that is in the new upgrade in Apple. And that automatically tracks like certain things, like certain geographies, I believe. I read a report where there's not only some geo tracking, but also it allows kids to like journal and just lock it all down with their own Face ID, which creates a division between children and parents, right? Because there's such a push on parents to not want to violate their kids' privacy, but to know when they're communicating about things like suicidal ideation or cyberbullying and things like that. And so there's platforms like Bark and things like that can assist parents in that. So it's such a challenge to try and generate and manage, all of those technologies while balancing privacy as well. It's tough. And then what about data sprawl? You mentioned that quite a bit. Like what can organizations do about like data sprawl? There's so many different variants and usages of the data. Like what are you seeing in the industry? What are different organizations starting to do?
So data sprawl is a problem. And every customer we find systems that they were not aware that they had in their ecosystem. So shadow IT is something that not only security practitioners need to know about, but also privacy practitioners, because if you're processing data, it's in scope from a privacy regulatory perspective. So you can't just be like, well, we didn't know. Well, you need to know. So that's something that the company I work at, a differentiator. So there are tools out there that you basically fill out a spreadsheet, which is never going to be complete. So you want something that's automated and that's going to flag systems as they come online. And we do that through a number of ways. Usually it's like relationship. We'll hook into your SSO. We can hook into your procurement tools. We can hook into your accounting tools. We can look into how different systems talk to each other to make that map. So understanding the processing environment is the first step, and really like the hardest step, David. That's really the most important part. If you're going to operationalize privacy, if you're going to say to somebody like, we're going to provide you this access request that you asked for, you can't just give them a half-hearted answer. And regulators are not going to care either if it was hard, because there are tools out there to do it. So getting a hold of your system inventory list is step one. And then figuring out what data is in there and the sensitivity of it. A challenge that a lot of companies have right now is that different states consider different data sensitive or not,
Right. So like, what is it like? Yes. First of all, the amount of new privacy laws out there that have come on in the last few years have been monumental, right? Like the number of U.S. citizens that are covered under privacy laws has increased exponentially just in the last, 5-6 years?
Yes. So there's this graphic I'd love to show.
Yeah, we can put it up on the screen now. It's like the percentage of U.S. residents covered by state privacy laws skyrocketing.
Right. And this is part of the challenge that I really want to educate people on, especially in the American market, which is where I spend a lot of my time here, and also EU. We also do global. There are many, many more privacy laws globally, but that would be a whole other podcast.
Yeah, exactly. I have to bring in some of my UK and EU friends.
So basically in the United States, consumer privacy laws are they're popping up like every other day. It started with California, then we got Virginia, Colorado, Utah, Connecticut, then a slew of other ones are coming online this year, next year. By 2026, just under half of the United States population will be covered. And why it's important to think about this not by a state by state way, but rather about individual people is because they're the ones with the rights, right? This is about privacy, about people, your data. Like, so when I come to a company and say, show me my data, if they give me your data, I'm like, wrong data. Where's mine?
Right, exactly. So, do all of these states have, and I'm not asking for like a legal opinion or anything. Yeah. Disclaimer, none of this is legal advice. Please consult a licensed attorney. But is a lot of this, do they give private causes of action? Like, is there a private right to sue? Or for just some states? Some states,
not all. Okay. So that's Washington State's My Health, My Data Act is something I would really strongly encourage.
That's a big one because that does give a private right to sue.
It has a private right of action, which means like you could be sued by a lot of people. So not just the attorney general can come after you, but everyday regular customers can as well. And the reason why I highlight that one is
insert class action attorneys in this line, right? Like that's because that's where the danger is, right? Because now all of a sudden privacy matters, because when you have to pay out on a class action, it's not like a slip and fall accident.
Correct. And well, the thing about that law too is they define health data so broadly that it could really implicate almost any data. So the intent.
Oh, really? That's much more broad than HIPAA or the HHS, right?
HIPAA, oh my gosh. So this is the problem with US market and privacy is there's sectoral law, federal agencies doing stuff, and there's these states. I would say I'm not even going to touch that as its own beast.
Yeah,
staying on consumer privacy. But the issue is with the health data, like if you are, again, the vitamins, right? We're getting back to these prenatal vitamins, or you're looking for something and it's implicating you for having some sort of disease or whatever. And it might just be like, I don't know, you bought orthotics for your feet. I have no idea. Like whatever random thing happens that you're just buying online, you're foot inserts, oh, do you have diabetes? So do we put you in the diabetes list or whatever? So basically, like kind of innocuous data today might actually be considered consumer health data under that law. So I would really encourage the folks listening to this podcast to look into that. What sort of data are you processing at your company, and is it in scope of that law? So that's coming online in March. In more full, they've implemented.
And is that only going to apply to people that live in Washington, or that anybody where they gather our data, which that could be any of us?
So that's also interesting. So it's for Washington state residents, but also includes anyone's data that's processed or collected in that state. So if your data could be anybody,
yeah.
Well, think about what type of tech companies are there.
Right. A whole mess of them. Right.
Lots of them. So that's one to keep in mind. California's law is very robust as well. Something of note there is they have a regulatory agency. They're the only agency. They have a dedicated group of people going after these privacy issues. And so they are on top of it. That's called the California Privacy Protection Agency. They're well funded. They have a big team. They are getting ready to start doing some more enforcements there.
I remember when it first came out, we were doing these security awareness trainings, and we were explaining, I'm like, you don't understand how this is going to change things. Like, you see the billboards of the trial attorneys now talking about, like, if you're injured in a truck accident, you're going to start seeing them. Like, if your data has been exposed or if you've been part of a data breach, and everybody's like, yeah, that's never happening. Don't worry about it. And now it's everywhere. And I'm like, I'm telling you, this is where it's going, right? It's like the new tort practice, basically. Yeah.
If you're interested in that, I highly recommend you check out BIPA in Illinois, the Biometric Information Privacy Act, that also has a private right of action, and the cases are wild. Some of those deal with basically like clock in, clock out technology that scans your fingerprint, and every single time you swipe your finger, that's like a $5,000 fine per person.
Right.
Every time, so $10,000 a day if they do a swipe in, swipe out. It's wild. So, privacy is definitely something I'd put on your radar for 2024 if it's not already on the radar. Especially because I think we're going to start seeing a lot more enforcement with these regulators. I really hope that companies realize that their customers demand this, and it's really a customer play, because nobody wants to be surprised. Nobody likes to find out the hard way that the data they provided a company was used in an unintended way. So maybe get out ahead of it in that way. But if you can't, use these pending regulatory actions as the fuel to light your fire.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really about risk, right? I mean, this is about business risk. It's about calculated risk. And it's very similar to the conversation we have when we're talking cybersecurity, right? Because business owners and leaders in organizations, even if it's not a private business, but it's a government entity, they want to manage their risk in a reasonable way, right? And they want to do it in a cost-effective way. And oftentimes they're challenged because they haven't had to expend budget in the past for some of these things. And now all of a sudden, some new regulation. Now we have to do it. We just want to check a box. We just want to do the minimum amount. But really, it's about balancing risk, right? Like, if you don't take certain precautionary measures, it's going to happen, and then you're going to pay exponentially more, right? And the likelihood of that happening continues to grow and grow and grow every month that goes by. And it's very similar to the privacy risk is very similar to the cybersecurity risk. You have a visual about how cybersecurity and privacy posture relates, and we'll put that up. Walk us through that. There's like high risk impact, and then it goes down to medium risk, and then a lower risk. How is that maturity? Because we like in the cybersecurity space, we always like talking about like maturity scales, right? Because organizations sometimes they have concerns and literally they just don't know what to do. right? They just don't know, like, am I at high risk right now? Like, we're doing X and Y. I hear I'm supposed to do 50 things. Okay, well, we can't afford 50 things, but we're doing 2. Are we supposed to do, which ones do we do next? What do we do to move the needle the most in the most cost effective way?
Right.
So walk us through that visual, if you don't mind.
So I hope the listeners on this podcast are going to be familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework.
Yes,
that
most
together. Very,
most
very
are. We live in it every day, mostly.
There's one for privacy. It's the same. They overlap. So this makes it
Phenomenal.
really easy. And so this graphic that I made, I kind of mashed the two together to show how they relate. And it's the same. It's like, okay, you're just getting started out. You really just don't understand what your risk is. And it's very reactive. Like maybe you get your first consumer request and they're like, tell me all about the data you have. And you're like, whoa, I've never done one of these before. What do I do? And now you're trying to figure that out. So then the next step, same as the CSF, is risk informed. You know what is happening, but you just haven't been able to address the risk. We find that the biggest problem is automating this risk or dealing with privacy risk from a technical standpoint. Like,
right.
I am
so
of the
they might have piecemeal solutions in place for some departments, but not all, etc. Right?
Yeah. Well, and you'll see privacy 1.0 tech solutions really. It was about spreadsheets, like, oh, just put in a spreadsheet everything that you're processing. That's not how modern businesses work.
Right.
If you ran your cybersecurity program on spreadsheets, I like it's not a
you got bigger issues if you're doing
yeah. It's not dynamic. You know, the landscape changes all the time. The same thing with privacy. Every time you get a new system, that needs to be pulled into your privacy visibility. So having an automated way to detect that and bring it in and deal with the risk. So let's say we'll see this a lot at DataGrail, where some of our customers are like, oh, somebody just onboarded some new AI tool and we didn't know, they didn't tell us, but our system found it, our shadow IT detection thing. Like, oh, great. Well, so now you can go to that person and be like, yes, no, you're not going to do this. Or like, hey, I found out that you're sharing sensitive customer data with this, unsanctioned third-party SaaS tool. Let's not do that. So really getting a visibility into your privacy risk, and it's the same for cybersecurity, but at a data level. So then it's repeatable. You get the tools and the people on staff to deal with this risk. We definitely think that the build it yourself way is not the way to go because it's such a dynamic, changing regulatory environment, that having a solution where you've got purpose-built privacy tech in place is important. I don't think some people are like, oh, just use a security tool for that. Like, no, there's privacy operations on top of that. So it's not just detecting.
Yeah, there really are, because security tools are more about detection or remediation and, like reducing the risk of the impact, whether it's ransomware or whether it's exfiltration. But when security incidents happen and they kind of have their arc, the privacy damage starts to explode, right?
Absolutely.
So so you need to, so really in a comprehensive, I would almost think as part of incident response plan, or as an organization is talking about doing their plan, what happens in a data breach, right? Well, the biggest part of that is, how are we going to notify our customers? How are we going to engage law enforcement? How are we going to deal with the media and the long-term play? Because, because the damage does not come from, oh, we're going to have to pay for monitoring for a couple million people. Like that's like, people aren't happy with that anyway. It's useless. And all of us have like 30 of them because we've all been in a million breaches, right? It's not useful. Like it's more about, what are you doing with our data and how are you responding to it? How did you prepare?
Absolutely. So you're absolutely touching on a point that for people that do cyber incident response, the privacy person at your organization must be a part of that, because when a breach happens and it implicates personal data of your customers, now these people have legal privacy rights. That is new. So you have to respond to them within a certain time frame. If it's Europe, it's 30 days. If it's US, mostly 45 days. That's not very long when you're dealing with an incident, right? Like 45 days comes and goes. But so,
Yeah.
and then how are you going to do that at scale? So,
Right.
let's say you have 1 million customers and,
Well, and what about the requests that come in after that?
that's what I'm saying. So you
Like,
get
here's
10.
my, because I didn't even take that into consideration. Like after the
Yes.
breach,
Yes.
there's you needing to proactively notify, but how many requests are going to come after that?
Right. And so that's why I
Right?
laugh when people say they do this stuff manually. I'm like, how?
How? Right.
How are you going to respond? And a regulator is not going to be like, I know that you never invested in this and you like didn't take it seriously.
Yeah,
And
it's fine. It's fine.
no,
That's like a doctor like doesn't wash his hands and just operates from the barbecue, right? And just kills somebody. They're like, dude, we know you didn't want to buy the expensive tools and you didn't want to bother doing that. It's fine. Don't you worry. Right?
right,
Like, no, like these rules are in place for a reason and
right,
they're going to enforce them.
right. That's what I'm saying. The world has changed around us.
All due respect to doctors out there. Please don't get mad at
Totally.
me. Yeah.
Like I use this analogy, maybe it's not very good, but where I grew up, I used to live in kind of a semi-rural area, and like we had country roads where it'd be a 2-lane road and there was literally nothing but farms. So you could
they still have those around Chicago suburbs. I grew up in them too. So
yeah. So growing up, speeding was not a problem,
No.
right? Oh, who cares? Oh,
You're not going to hit anything. There's nothing out there. Right.
A cop might pull you over, but not really.
Right.
So speed. But then what was really interesting is the area where I grew up then started to develop. And we started getting little malls and like a school and then a movie theater and all these shops. And that same country road was now a 4-lane highway with like cross streets, right? People coming in and out, stoplights. So if I was speeding
can't
on that,
be blowing down that road anymore. Right.
Because the risk to me has changed. I could get T-boned. I could T-bone somebody. I could blow a red and then hurt someone and kill myself, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get at here is that like that you can continue speeding, I guess, if you want to, but the world around you has changed rapidly. And I don't think that we have really grasped that in security and privacy, like how fast and how much this has changed. And that's why that
I mean, and people, listeners of the podcast know that we come across this. My team works here in the Midwest and we come across it all the time with, a hypothetical healthcare organization in rural Kansas, right? And they're like, why do we need this? Why we like we're over here. No one's going to get to us. And we try to explain, but you're online. Like when you get online, you enter their world, right? Like, and it is very complex. Right. And so, we're not in Kansas anymore.
We are not in Kansas anymore. I feel like whatever data you're collecting, if it's valuable to your company, your privacy program and your security program have to match that value, right? Yeah. So if it's location data, sensitive personal information, you've got to have a security and a privacy program that's going to be commensurate for that. So like you're right. We're not in Kansas anymore. We have to do better, and we have the tools in place to do that. We have the regulatory pushes to do this. Consumer expectations are changing. I see this a lot too when we work with B2B companies. They know they need to get a defensible privacy program in place because it's slowing down their deals. So there's sales velocity at play too, where you're like, we didn't invest in this. And now when I'm trying to onboard a new B2B customer, they're asking me questions about a privacy program and I have nothing to respond to them about. So that's another thing.
Well, it's so true. And that is the same in cybersecurity, because so often now, even smaller organizations who are vendors or subcontractors of a larger organization, they're being asked now by that larger organization, what is your cybersecurity posture?
Right.
What layers of security do you have? And now they're getting asked about privacy, right? Yeah. And they're like, I don't even have my cybersecurity layers intact, let alone my privacy. Right. And they're like, well, who's your privacy person? They're like, who's our what? They're like, it's our CEO, I guess. I don't know. Like, talk to HR. Like, nobody knows, right? Well, it's another hat that somebody has to wear.
That's the hot potato of privacy, because if you don't have a purpose like job for that, then sometimes security gets it, sometimes legal does, sometimes It's kind of all over the place. And that's what's so funny. We deal with so many different types of people from different professional backgrounds dealing with privacy, because organizations are still figuring out where this fits in the organization. So for the listeners on this podcast, we do see security practitioners get kind of handed this thing called privacy, and like, how do you operationalize that? It's a team sport. You're going to need your GRC person. You're going to need your risk compliance people. You're going to need your legal team. You're going to need your execs. You're going to need your board. You're going to need your investors, all on the same page here. And the easiest way to make that connection to the work that you're doing today is to understand when a data breach of personal information becomes a privacy harm. So it's not that you just send the letters, you're part of a data breach and you're done. That's just the beginning. Right. It's kind of like, I always laugh when people like buy new software and like the salespeople are like, okay, we're done. I'm like, no, that's the start.
That's when the work begins. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Same thing in privacy.
Yeah. Well, and I think this has been great, by the way. So like the conversation's been absolutely fantastic. And we'll address the questions, and we'll gather those up. The most shocking thing is how much our data is sold and then resold that we're not aware of, right? You have a one last visual that talks about a study that was done about like all of the data, like our data is touched by thousands of different companies when we just kind of click, I accept, in the T's and C's for one app.
Right.
Like how is that, how did that get by? How is nobody manning the store at that point? Like, I'm still boggled by that. In part of this whole problem that businesses are having or organizations are having to deal with all this additional regulation now is because the data brokers have kind of created this monster in a sense, right?
Yes. So the graphic is a study that I think it was Consumer Reports. Consumer Reports did. They have a number of very interesting privacy studies, by the way. I'd highly also recommend your readers check out the privacy in automobiles report they've done. It is fascinating. The type of data that car companies are. I would argue that a big part
owning an EV myself, I find I'm a little disturbed now. Now I'm going to have to go check that out.
Well, what's interesting is car companies have really become data brokers. It's a revenue source for them. So it's not just selling you an IoT device, called a car. Now what data are they collecting and then selling about you?
Sure.
So this is kind of where monetization of data has just become so normalized. Part of the surveillance capitalism society that we live in. But the problem is the consumers haven't really been privy to that. So this graphic you are showing is basically showing that 2,230 different companies touched an individual person's data from Facebook, which, as we all know, has a lot of different types of tracking uses and things like that. But
they're really good. They're a fantastic company when it comes to privacy. Sorry. No offense. Yeah. We're not sponsored by them. It's okay.
And that's so interesting.
And if we're live streaming to them at some point, I'm sure this video will be killed. But that's all right.
Possible.
Not worried.
But what's interesting is a lot of people and users of Facebook don't even know that. Right?
No, they have no idea.
Pictures.
They're still responding to the quiz about who was your favorite teacher back in high school? And where did your parents meet? And what is your favorite food? Because that's a quiz on Facebook, not knowing that that's really a social engineering tactic, because those are the same questions that are your security questions to guess your password.
100%.
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with privacy really, but I'm like a huge proponent of like maybe moving on from passwords and doing other types of authentication. Password lists would be great, or, multiple.
Or biometrics, some type of keyword. Yeah, some type of key. I mean, a lot of people in the security industry have pass keys, like a physical thing that have to go in.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
we need to move past the knowledge-based authentication factors, passwords. Like I think you shared with me this morning, 26 billion records were, consolidated and now are for sale on illicit web right now.
The big issue, here's the big issue. The issue is not only are we terrible as a culture of creating good passwords, but once we get a good one, right? We all have it. We all have a really good one. But then once we get that good one, we're using it on everything. Like we're like, I've got my good password. I'm putting it on Facebook. I'm putting it in my banking app. I'm using it at work, blah, blah, blah. But what we don't know is that gets sold and mixed and it's for sale right now. And they do credential stuffing. They just go and they run these password spraying softwares and they will just go and take that or algorithmic, changes to that really good one that you had, right? And they're going to get into anything that you have. And in our trainings, we walk through people what really happens when they do become you online. Like they literally can make people homeless. Like they are you. Like they can, when they can compromise one account, they can compromise almost all of them. And then they're able to just take over your life digitally. And what have you done recently that didn't involve a computer or a phone or an electronic credit card payment? Like, can you identify many activities that you've done? Because when they're able to take over your digital life, they're controlling all of that.
Absolutely.
Right? So there's not much else left that's not part of that life.
Absolutely.
And that's where the risk comes in.
I completely agree, David. It's funny because I know better and I do have decent, I would say, password hygiene, and I use multiple factor authentication where available. And
yeah, I'm not, I have to, we absolutely, I make no comment. No comment. Yeah, because we're all guilty of it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like I would love to say I don't have a really good password that I've reused. Like, of course I have. Like, of course we have. But there are some things that we do now. Like I've gotten a lot better, especially starting this podcast. Yeah. A few years back, I've gotten a lot better, but it's just human nature, man.
Hard. You're just trying to get out through your day,
Yeah.
And it's the same thing when you you hit, yes, I agree, even though you don't, when you agree with data practices. But
yeah, I just want to download like the white paper. Like there's some cool study or there's something I could use. I just want to do that. Like, give me your information. I'm like, sure, whatever. Here, just give me the download, right? Or let me download the app. It's crazy.
It really is. So I hired a firm to do open source intel on me and see what they found.
Did you really?
And I was like horrified. I was like, oh man, like I thought I was doing well. And like they were able to find stuff like it's like including passwords, like my go-to, crappy password for like when I'm trying to download something silly, which anyway. And I was like, oh man, but that was part of me doing an authorized agent for my privacy rights requests where there's just too many. Like I don't have a full-time job to sit around and delete myself from all these companies. So I hired another to do it. And
so there are companies that will do like an OSINT investigation on you.
Well, so there's kind of layers of authorized agent companies. There's ones that are more automated and they'll just kind of fire off emails to companies. So like check out the Consumer Reports one. It's called Permission Slip. It's an app you can download. Read the privacy policy though before you do that. Mm-hmm. And basically they'll just like fire off emails to big brands and saying like, hey, we were authorized by so-and-so to delete their data. Please go ahead and do that. But then there are companies that do this as a service. So they do much more in-depth work on your behalf. That's much more comprehensive. So there's about 50 of those types of companies out there. And if you want some names,
so that's Permission Slip by
Consumer Reports. Yes.
Cool.
There's ones you can actually pay for. So that's a freebie. You get what you pay for, but there's companies you can hire to do.
Yeah, but if they're searching for that, they'll come across the more extensive ones.
Right. Well, and so here's how this ties back into privacy, though. So if you're one of those companies, like so, for example, when I did the permission slip, they had companies in there like Home Depot and AMC theaters. Mm-hmm. And so now Home Depot is getting all of these privacy requests from this app called Permission Slip on behalf of millions of people who've downloaded this app. And imagine now everybody shops at Home Depot almost, right? So now all of a sudden you get this flood of consumer privacy requests. How are you as a company going to operationalize that? Like,
how did they? Do we know?
I don't know. I haven't talked to them. I should, but yeah, stuff like that, where it's the scale of what's happening in privacy is also.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that. That's a great point. Here's an app that's there to help people. And now we just caused a company to like employ 5 people because they have to like start to deal with this, or to engage with managed services, outsource contracted services, or both.
Why I'm really strongly suggesting people look into automation capabilities to meet that demand. So we have a customer that had 300, it's a big enterprise. They had 300 different people operationalizing one data deletion request. That's because they would go to the system owners and be like, delete so-and-so out of this CRM, delete so-and-so out of the marketing thing, delete so-and-so out of the payroll thing. You know, like, it's just like, now you're bothering system owners where they're like, I have my own job to do. I can't just delete for you all day. So that's why if you get automation, you can automate those deletion, system-based deletion or access requests. So from a process that was 300 people, we got down to one person who's just the privacy manager who oversees the software. So that's a lot of time, employee time saved. And then also being distracted, because a lot of engineers are asked to make a privacy program from scratch, and that's not their core competency.
Well, they're asked, and that's the whole thing. A lot of IT engineers, network engineers that have backgrounds in networking, right, are because it's technology, like business leaders are like, okay, you're handling cybersecurity. Yeah. And they're like, sure, I got it. Don't you worry. But the point is that they're not cybersecurity experts. Right. Right. Like cybersecurity is a whole different category. It's a whole different, ecosystem, everything about it, the certifications, the experience, the training, everything. Right. There's so many different layers. So,
and so here's something else to consider is if you do, which I'm hoping people do, get a system to deal with your privacy operations. One of the things I'd really recommend people consider when they're buying a tool is how invasive the privacy tool is itself. How much access are you giving this third party to go do these deletion requests or understand your data map? Because having
I didn't even think about that because
So now
and threat actors are going to target those organizations that are doing that.
Well, so that's why you need a tool that has the least privilege access to achieve privacy problem. We see a lot of companies that are like, we can be everything to all people and we can do all of this stuff. Just give us access. And I'm like, whoa, sirens blazing, like not, let's not do that. If you're trying to operationalize a consumer's data privacy request to delete their data, you don't need to give all of this access to a privacy provider just to do that. Go do that. Go do the privacy operation. Don't try to do all of this extra stuff. So there are companies in the ecosystem that do like network sniffing to like find data, like data's moving. You're like, whoa, like, could you do that another way? And so that's something I would really encourage your listeners to really delve deep into, like how much access are they willing to give in order to do the privacy operations. So
that's good insight because leave the network sniffing to the threat actors.
Yes, thank you.
Because they'll do it for us. And we won't know it, and nobody will know it. And that's why we're employed, unfortunately. But that's why it's the
you can do it other ways.
Yes. So excellent. Hey, Mary Margaret, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, I've really had a lot of fun. It's so nice to talk with you, and thanks to everybody who listened.
No, absolutely fantastic. We'll have links to your LinkedIn and to Data Grail right in the show notes. So check them out. And I'm sure it's not the last time that we will be speaking. So
yeah, hope it's first of many. Thanks, David.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Well, that wraps this up. Thanks for joining, everybody. Hope you got value out of digging deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today. Please don't forget to help keep this going by subscribing free to our YouTube channel at Cybercrime Junkies Podcast, and download and enjoy all of our past episodes on Apple and Spotify podcasts so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and we thank you for joining us. Well, things aren't getting any safer online, and we're excited to tell you about our exclusive offer for Aura, which is linked in the show notes below. Hey everyone, this is your host David Morrow, and we often get asked about individual safety and ways to protect loved ones or small business employees when they're online. So we turned to our friends at Cyber Threat Group, a full-service security consultancy located here in the US, and they told us all about Aura. You might have even seen actor Robert Downey Jr. in their television ads. Look, identity theft isn't cheap. The FTC reports that Americans lost $8.8 billion in identity theft and personal fraud this year, and can cost you personally hundreds of thousands of dollars. Aura provides it all. Financial and identity theft protection, a lightning-fast VPN for online privacy, antivirus, a password manager, and even parental controls for safe gaming and spam call protection. So protect your family or your employees when they get online. Give the gift of online safety. Check out the link in our show notes from our friends at Cyber Threat Group today. Aura is a great way to protect yourselves online. Check out Aura today and stay safe online.